Hi, I'm Janica Vella Buhagiar. I'm a curator here at the Phoenician Roman Medieval section at Heritage Malta, and today I'm going to be introducing you to my favorite artifact, which is this inscription that we see over here. This is a commemorative plaque. It is dated between the 4th and 8th century after Christ, and it was found in 1875 outside Medina. And it is very interesting, for one thing, because this is one of the few instances in Maltese history where we know the name of the deceased, Valeria. We also have additional names in the inscriptions, and these are of Fufica Galena and Curtius Diadomenos, husband and wife, who erected this tomb for the well-deserving Valeria. So what we find interesting, for me personally at least, is just how instantaneously relatable this inscription is. Although it is a centuries-old artifact, it is identical to the funerary plaques that we find today in our own cemeteries. When dealing with artifacts, it's always important to consider the context. And in this case, we're going to consider a small part of the context, that is, the material. The material of this inscription is made out of lead. And this is, or it was, a common material in ancient Rome. So we know that for many reasons, Valeria was not perhaps a person of good financial means. If we compare it to other epitaphs, which could be much more expensive, they were made out of different materials. Fine white marble, they would have had different colored marbles as well, as opposed to the inscription that is here behind me. What we also find in this inscription, the context itself, is the writing. Yes, it's in Latin language, but the way it is spaced out is not as orderly and neat as the more expensive epitaphs. We also find that there's not a lot of detail about Valeria herself. Her skills, for example, her achievements are not listed in this plaque, whereas if it were a good, a beautiful, expensive epitaph, you would have much more details about the identity and the role of the deceased. One of the heritage values that this object embodies is intangible heritage. And unfortunately, we don't always consider this when we handle actual artifacts, objects, but intangible heritage is displayed very clearly in this epitaph in the form of language, in this case the Latin language and the Latin alphabet, which was so influential for many European languages. And in fact, if we look closely at the epitaph, we also see two names that we still use today, Valeria and Curt. So Valeria comes from the Latin verb valere, which means to be brave or to be strong. And Curt comes from the Latin word meaning courtly or courteous. Another interesting aspect about this artifact is that at the bottom here we find the image of a dove holding an olive branch in its beak, which is a pretty standard Christian symbol, which means peace and salvation. But if we look at the top of the epitaph, we see an abbreviation, DM, and this is for this manibus, which means for the manes. The manes were like a divinized form of the dead, which were worshipped by the Romans. But what is interesting is, even though this is a Christian inscription, a Christian epitaph, we find a reference to the manes that were pagan in origin.